Good afternoon, everybody. Bruchim Habaim, welcome to Temple Shalom. I know that I echo the sentiments of the family when I say thank you for coming this afternoon to join in this celebration of Arthur's life. A little over 6 weeks ago when Arthur left us, it created a void we knew was coming, and yet in the time that we spend this afternoon, it is our hope that we will soften any sense of that void as we reflect on the many lessons of Arthur's life, the many gifts that he has given us, the ways he's touched us and taught us and will continue to do so through God's tender gift of memory. I believe that you should have received a little bit of a program book on your way in, and you will find some of the selections from this afternoon's celebration within those pages. We are grateful that the Klezmer Conservatory Band is with us, very much what Arthur wanted, almost a New Orleans flavor to our gathering as we remember him. So again, my name is Eric Gervis. I'm one of the rabbis here at Temple Shalom, and I am grateful for all of you on behalf of the family being here. And I'd like to begin our commemoration with some words that I shared with the family on the day of Arthur's burial. The words of poet David Harkins, they're actually printed in your booklet, but I'm going to take some liberties. It's called Choices After Death. We can shed tears that he is gone, or we can smile because he's lived. We can close our eyes and pray that he'll come back, or open our eyes and see all that he has left. Our hearts can feel empty because we can't see him, or they can feel full because of the love that we've shared. We can turn our backs on tomorrow and live for yesterday, or we can feel a sense of happiness for tomorrow because of yesterday. We can remember Arthur and only that he's gone, or we can cherish his precious memory, and through God's gift of memory, let it live on. We can cry and close our minds, be empty, we can turn our backs, or we can do what Arthur assuredly wanted us to do. To smile, as we will this afternoon, to open our eyes, to love, and to go on. The heart of our gathering this afternoon will be the sharing of tender memories, members of the family, friends. We're going to begin first with some words from Arthur's partner in life, his beloved wife, Judy, who will be followed by an old friend, Joan Curhan.
Dear family and friends, thank you for coming to honor Arthur by celebrating his life. He always wished for a celebration of who he was and what he did, not a sad account of his death. He lived a very full 84 years, and I shared 53 of those with him. Some of the facts about his life are in your program and on the web and in displays in the social hall where the reception will be held. His family was his core, and the most excited I ever saw him was when our son Hank was born. He was overjoyed as well as each of our grandchildren came and was able to connect with them freely and openly. In addition to our love of family, we shared a love of travel and a wish to leave a better world than the one we inherited. We were best friends and soulmates as we tried to have a positive impact on our world. If you asked Arthur what he did, he would answer, "I'm a serial entrepreneur. I like to start things." He saw a need, and if he felt he could do something about it, he acted. I could talk about his work in Russia after Glasnost, his work with Betty, our longtime assistant and helpmate, creating websites for a great variety of nonprofits, including the first website for Temple Shalom. His extensive genealogical work, including the various projects in Germany, or his work on behalf of a two-state solution in Israel. However, I will focus on two of the things that he was most proud of because he felt they had a real impact on the country. The first was initiated by our strong feelings against the Vietnam War. We attended the 1968 National Convention in Chicago as members of the press, representing his brother Obi's two newspapers. It was a life-altering experience, and it galvanized us to action. Our local congressman was a hawk on the war and had been in office for a very long time. We were unable to dislodge him in '68, but in anticipation of the 1970 election, it was clear that the only way to make a change was to defeat him in the primary. In a conversation with a friend in Newton, Arthur suggested Father Robert Drinan, a Jesuit priest and dean of the Boston College Law School. He had heard Drinan speak at an event against the war and was very impressed. Acting on his conviction, which he often did, Arthur helped convince Drinan to run. Of course, there were others interested in running for the seat. A group of activists, including Arthur, decided that their only chance was in rallying around one candidate. A caucus was held here in Concord, Massachusetts, and there were three candidates: Drinan, Harry Stevens, and a young soldier recently returned from Vietnam, John Kerry. Drinan won, and to his credit, John Kerry worked hard to get Drinan elected. As noted in several articles in the press, it was an important turning point in Massachusetts politics, starting a period of much more liberal politics and actions. The second thing began with a conversation between Arthur and Senator Ted Kennedy in the 1970s. Massachusetts was a hotbed of innovative technology companies, but the National Science Foundation refused to give any money for research to businesses, only universities and nonprofit research institutions. Arthur convinced Kennedy that allowing small companies to compete for research dollars would be good for the country, as well as good for Massachusetts companies. Kennedy at the time was chair of the NSF subcommittee of the Senate and wrote into the legislation a provision that a small part of the budget of the program then called Research Applied to National Needs should go to small business. The NSF countered. They eliminated the program. Whereupon the next year, Kennedy came back. He wrote into legislation that a small percentage of the total NSF budget would now go to small business. This forced the NSF to create a program now known as the Small Business Innovation Research Program, or the SBIR program. The first two awards for that program were given out in 1978, and Arthur's company, Moleculon, won two of the awards. Over the next few years, Arthur and I were deeply involved in getting the SBIR program spread system-wide. We talked extensively about our efforts, particularly those at the 1980 White House Conference on Small Business. At a ceremony at the White House last June, when we were inducted into the Small Business Research Program Hall of Fame. The program now provides over $2 billion a year to innovative small companies, and I was extremely pleased that Arthur was able to attend the ceremony. In talking about its impact, Arthur liked to use the example of Kendall Square in Cambridge, which is where his company was. When he started his company in 1962, there wasn't much there. It was pretty open and barren. If you look at a picture of Kendall Square today, It is filled with buildings containing companies of every variety, particularly today healthcare and biotech because of the nature of the area. A large percentage of those companies started with SBIR money, and there's a similar impact in technology centers in other parts of the country. As for me, I turned into an activist and advocate, not just for the things that he believed in, but those that spoke to me as well. He always encouraged me to follow my interests and believed in my abilities even when I wasn't so sure. On the one hand, he threatened not to marry me if I did not finish my PhD thesis. At the same time, he spent hours helping me proofread it so I could get it in. He was a role model worth emulating and my biggest cheerleader. I will miss his wind at my back.
I am honored that Arthur's family has asked me to speak about our very dear friend, whom I met over 55 years ago. It all started with a blind date. This was arranged by Sylvia Tarlin, the mother of one of my best friends to this day, Lloyd Tarlin. She met Arthur at a party where she gave him my name. Starting around 1960, we dated for approximately 2 delightful and fascinating years, during which Arthur, a PhD chemist from MIT, who was at that time employed at Allied Research Associates in Boston, decided to start his own company, Moleculon Research, and a chemical, polymer, and pharmaceutical R&D company was the result. Ever the innovator, there was just one problem. Arthur had no employees, no contracts, to my knowledge, and neither lab or office space. At the time, I was the research assistant to 3 Harvard Business School professors working on The World of Business, a 4-volume book that they were writing. My desk was in the corporation records room of Baker Library at the Harvard Business School, and I shared it with several librarians. At night, after they went home, Arthur would come over to bring me work to do for Moleculon on my electric typewriter. These were mainly grant proposals to various government agencies, and I was not the best of typists. This was in the days prior to personal computers, and thus, whenever I made a typo, correcting it was quite a challenge. Miraculously, in spite of the typing, some funding did come through, and in due course, Arthur purchased a brick building in Kendall Square as Moleculon became more firmly established. The purchase of the Kendall Square property turned out to be quite a brilliant investment. In addition, Arthur used me as a sounding board for his future plans for Moleculon, a role from which I learned a great deal. Lest you think that ours was purely a business relationship, we had a lot of fun as well. Arthur was always discovering new restaurants. I do recall that Cafe Budapest was a favorite of his. What I recall most, though, were the numerous and wonderful parties hosted by Arthur at his apartment at 100 Memorial Drive. Guests, and there may be a number of people in this room who attended some of those parties. Guests were from various age groups, often older than Arthur. One in particular, Isaac Asimov, made a great impression on me. He was an intriguing conversationalist, a well-known science fiction author, and always a great fan of Arthur. Recently, I learned that Arthur found some older unpublished papers in which Isaac distilled his thoughts on creativity, and as was typical of Arthur, he saw to it that they were published. You can see the results in an exhibit just outside of this space later on. As an aside, when I look back at photographs of Arthur during this time, I see a distinct resemblance in his son, Joel. Through Arthur, I met his outstanding parents, Julia and Leon Obermayer. After my work at the Harvard Business School was concluded and the book was published, I went to work at Arthur D. Little, a large consulting firm at the time. In connection with my research there, I had the pleasure of going to Philadelphia and interviewing Arthur's father at his Philadelphia law firm. But I was actually interviewing him in his capacity as chair of the Philadelphia School Committee. Indeed, he was very impressive. During this time, I was also dating others, including Ronald Curhan, who told me about a wonderful person whom he had been seeing until recently, and that happened to be Judy. In due course, he gave me an ultimatum that I needed to date only him. Having recently graduated from college, I was enjoying a varied social life and resisted this for some time. However, just about the time when I finally acquiesced, we were invited to a party on Cape Cod for the day. It was there that we met a friend of Judy's who told us how much Judy wanted to meet someone special. On the way back to Boston that evening in 1962, Ron and I discussed the possibility of introducing Arthur to Judy. After all, Arthur had told me that the idea of him ending up with a college professor was appealing, and Judy was teaching at Wellesley College. Realizing how much he respected capable women, perhaps because of his wonderful and strong mother, this made a lot of sense, but could I muster up the courage to do this? After all, Arthur and I were just parting ways, and I had never met Judy. Ultimately, I felt that the possible outcome could make two people very happy, and putting aside fear and trepidation, I called Arthur. He was very receptive, and as they say, the rest is history. Arthur and Judy even got married before we did. From that phone call, a wonderful relationship ensued between Arthur and Judy and Ron and me. I will always admire Arthur and his many accomplishments that enhance the lives of so many others, and above all, his great love for his family. His life was too short. But as he said in his recent interview with WBUR, he felt he had made the time he had meaningful and worthwhile. Indeed, he did. Thank you very much.
We're now going to hear from Arthur's nephew, Joe Sellers, who will be followed by a friend from Germany who has been working with the museum project for over 13 years, excuse me, Martin Uwinkel. We also want to acknowledge the presence of the Consul General of Germany, the Honorable Rolf Erlemann. Joe, where are you? There you are.
My mother, Helen Sellers, who was Arthur's older sister, was fond of repeating the familiar adage that the greatest gift parents can give, and I would add other relatives, is to their loved ones is to provide roots and wings. Arthur provided both to me. As everyone here knows, Arthur was fascinated by genealogy. That passion led him to develop a very special bond with the German people, which I will leave to others to note today. Less heralded, however, but equally, if not more significant to me, was Arthur was our family historian. Arthur traced our family lineage back centuries. I learned from Arthur, for example, that the Obermayer family are descendants of a man who lived in Germany in the 1600s by the name of Isaac the Jew. I also learned that the Obermayer name was created in order to distinguish the two Jewish butchers in Kriegshaber, Germany in the 1700s. Both butchers had the name Ben Meyer. To distinguish them, one butcher took the name Untermeyer, while the other butcher, who lived upstream from him, took the name Obermayer. That the Obermayer name, which has defined this family for several hundred years, owed its origin to such a practical and mundane purpose, reminded me that the power of families comes from the personal bonds between family members, not the surname they may happen to share. Perhaps Arthur's lessons about the power of family resonated most clearly at our family's Passover Seders. For 92 years, the Obermayer family has been holding a Seder annually to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Passover. In addition to descendants by blood who were invited, close friends and neighbors were always welcome. While I wasn't there at the beginning, some of my earliest memories were from Obermayer Seders, in which I was as likely to have sat next to a recent immigrant who had no other place to celebrate Passover as I was to sit with a relative. As the years have passed, new generations have joined the Seders who have no memory of those who were there before. To pass along to them the memory of those who had passed away, each year Arthur, the family historian, provided vivid portraits of people who had attended Seders past in order that they would be remembered. In doing so, Arthur reminded me of the deep and rich roots that members of the Obermayer family and their friends share. Arthur also helped provide me with wings. After college, I worked for a while as a community organizer. On a visit with Judy and Arthur, we discussed other uses to which I could put the skills as an organizer that I had developed. Arthur suggested that I join one of the presidential primary campaigns, which were then just beginning in 1976. When I settled on Morris Udall as the candidate for whom I wanted to work, Arthur promptly introduced me to Bill Carmen, who was running the Udall primary campaign in this area. While I had a passing interest in electoral politics in the past, work on the Udall campaign and nightly discussions with Judy and Arthur, with whom I was staying, introduced me to the nitty-gritty of politics. After the Massachusetts primary, Arthur suggested I continue my work with the Udall campaign for the New York primary. But my enthusiasm for the campaign cooled when I learned I was being assigned to run the campaign in the most northern congressional district of New York, along the Canadian border in the middle of February. And the campaign was going to send me off with a whopping $25 as gas money, a trunk full of campaign brochures, and introductions to a few families with whom I might be able to stay. I'd never done anything remotely like this before. However, in his methodical and analytical way, Arthur reviewed and dispelled each reason for my hesitation. Then he convinced me that I could handle this significant responsibility. His parting advice was there were times in life when we have to take a chance, and this was just such a time. I took that chance. It led to my advancing at the campaign at the age of 22 to serve on the national campaign staff, where I ran the field operations for Udall's Pennsylvania and Ohio primary campaigns. Ultimately, Arthur's encouragement kindled in me a lifelong interest in politics. But it was the calm and resolute way in which he urged me to take a chance when caution counseled otherwise, to make a leap into the unknown in order to pursue an exciting but entirely unfamiliar opportunity that has made a decisive difference in many choices I've made throughout the rest of my life. Arthur, thanks for helping me recognize my roots and grow my wings.
Dear Judy, Hank, Joelle, Marjorie, and families, dear relatives and friends of Arthur, ladies and gentlemen. It is an outstanding honor to me to speak here today at the celebration of Arthur Obermayer's life. My name is Martin Heuwinkel. I am the managing director of the Jewish Museum Kreklingen, and I was Arthur's representative in the board of the Foundation Jewish Museum Kreklingen. I speak on the behalf of the Foundation Jewish Museum Kreklingen and of the people of Kreklingen, the hometown of Arthur's ancestors, where his 9 times great-grandfather Simson from Rheinsbonn was allowed to settle in 1618 during the 30 Years' War. And I speak for my wife Claudia and me as friends. Arthur's engagement in Kreklingen was possibly just a small spot in the view of his tremendous philanthropic actions. But I know it was important to him, and it is still important for Kreklingen, its citizens, and our region. On 25th of March 1933, as our troops disturbed the Shabbat service on Pesach in the Kreklingen synagogue, drove the Jewish men to the city hall, birched them there in questioning for illegal weapons. 2 men, Hermann Stern and Arnold Rosenfeld, died due to the injuries they suffered on that day. Arthur's granduncle Rudolf Sinsheimer was among the 16 tortured victims of that day. Kreklingen had to cope with that trauma and was accused a long time being a place of old Nazis, and that nothing really should have changed since then. When Arthur got the information from my wife Claudia that the house on the living place of his ancestors was on sale in 1998, his first reaction was, bring it back to the family. But then he had the idea to install a Jewish museum, not as a Holocaust memorial, but as a place to show the history of the Jewish community Kreklingen over the centuries. He did not want to focus on the Third Reich. He wanted to show also the good times. He wanted to document what the Jewish people in Kreklingen did and what impact they had on others and the society in which they lived. This great idea was an unbelievable contribution to the reconciliation of people, which was one of Arthur's aims in life. Nowadays, we have a respectable institution with the Jewish Museum, and the people recognize that Kreklingen stands to its historic responsibility. With his idea, Arthur opened the minds and the hearts for reconciliation, and descendants of Kreklingen Jews from all over the world came and come to the city of their ancestors and find that they are not forgotten. Besides his significant financial engagement in this project, he was also an intellectual promoter who had the ability to persuade people in a very calm and convincing manner. Craikling and its citizens owe him much more than just a museum. It's due to him that this city found a way to cope with its past properly or to make things better in future. I have the honor to convey the thank of Mayor Uwe Heen and the citizens of Skreklingen at this ceremony. We will keep Arthur in good memory and continue the work in his sense. Ladies and gentlemen, beside the serious part of my speech, I also want to follow the wish of the family and tell you a little amusing anecdote about Arthur, which shows that he also had a very fine kind of humor. If Arthur started sneezing, it was not done with 2 or 3 sneezes. Sometimes it was nearly a chain reaction. So one day in the city archive of Craklingen, he had one of these sneezing attacks. He told Claudia that he inherited this from one of his female ancestors, and he asked Claudia, with a twinkle in his eyes, if she could not identify the origin of this possible genetic problem in the old records. And I can report about Arthur's career as a smuggler and food bon vivant. We already heard about his interest for restaurants. He was so fond of Claudia's homemade full-grain bread that one day he hid one of these breads in his suitcase thoroughly to get it through the customs control. Back home, he cut it in slices and froze it to enjoy it longer. The other day, he tasted a special South German meal at our home in Craklingen. He was so thrilled of the special liquid seasoning we used that he wrapped a little bottle of it in one of his socks and stuffed it into his shoes to bring it back home. We never heard if Jews used it for cooking. Arthur was such a pleasant, smart, and wise man. We are glad knowing him, and we miss him. Thank you for your attention.
Back in mid-January, when we gathered for Arthur's funeral, I shared some words from Winston Churchill. I'd like to share them again as a segue into our next speakers. They were from a letter that Churchill wrote to his wife entitled "In the Event of My Death." And in part he writes, "Do not grieve for me too much. I am a spirit confident of my rights. Death is only an incident and not the most important, which happens to us in this state of being. On the whole, especially since I met you, my darling one, I have been happy, and you've taught me how noble a woman's heart can be. If there is anywhere else, I shall be on the lookout for you. Meanwhile, look forward, feel free, rejoice in life, cherish the children, guard my memory. God bless you." As Judy said before, the centerpiece, with all of the many interests in Arthur's life, the centerpiece was his family. And so we're going to hear from his sons, Hank and Joel, and then a musical presentation by all three children.
I'd like to speak a little about about my understanding of my father's sense of spirituality. Like many people, my father was interested in who he was and where he came from. For some people, this is about science or physics. For some, about God. For some, about introspection or psychology. My father, while a scientist, was kind of focused on family ancestry. He considered himself to be an atheist and a Jew. And for him, this was not a contradiction. Being Jewish was about honoring your roots and the traditions of your ancestors. About a year and a half ago, I explicitly thanked my father for teaching me how to pray. I told him that growing up, every Friday night on Shabbat, he used to bless the children. He would put his hands on our heads and say the traditional priestly blessing, closing with Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord lift up his countenance unto you and give you peace, in the translation he would use. As someone who called himself an atheist, he didn't really like this, that I was speaking about his prayer. He said he used the word Lord or God because that was the prayer, not because he believed in God. I explained it so that he understood, though. As a kid, my experience was that I heard my dad wishing for me to have peace in my life. He would get very emotional. He wasn't speaking to me or to anyone in particular, but he was speaking the deep longings of his heart, and I could feel it. To me, my father's values as an activist or an advocate came directly from this longing for peace for his children and for the world. He lived this through his actions in the world, whether that was the movement for peace in Vietnam, working for German Jewish healing, or in his engagement in the peace movement in Israel. He held these values both very individually for his children, or personally, and globally. In my life, I work on multiple levels. I work very individually, sort of as a therapist, and I also have a background as an activist, which plays out these days in terms of helping people look at humanity's future as it relates to the challenges, of this era. In late November, I visited my parents and saw my father in person for the last time. During that visit, I told him that I consider the core of my work to be praying for people and teaching them how to pray. Things he taught me. After that, I sang him a song, a prayer that emerged out of the Jewish experience of World War II that's basically a prayer for humanity to continue. And he cried when I was singing this. Jewish tradition asks us to look at life from a broad perspective like this regularly, including when someone dies via the Kaddish. I'm not going to bring us into saying the Kaddish now. My father wanted this event to be today to be a celebration of his life, and most people don't hold the Kaddish as a celebratory prayer. But the themes of the Kaddish are relevant to all this, about prayer and about peace. And I like the poet Marge Piercy's interpretation of the Kaddish, which I'm going to share with you. Look around us. Search above us, below, behind. We stand in a great web of being joined together. Let us praise, let us love the life we are lent, passing through us in the body of Israel and our own bodies. Let's say amen. Time flows through us like water. The past and the dead speak through us. We breathe out our children's children, blessing. Blessed is the earth from which we grow. Blessed the life we are lent. Blessed the ones who teach us. Blessed the ones who teach. And blessed is the world that cannot say the glory that shines through us and remains to shine, flowing past distant suns on the way to forever. Let's say amen. Blessed is light. Blessed is darkness. But blessed above all else is peace, which bears the fruits of knowledge on strong branches. Let's say amen. Peace that bears joy into the world, peace that enables love, peace over Israel, peace everywhere. Blessed and holy is peace. Let's say amen.
I'd like to talk about some gifts my father gave to me in the last year of his life. The first gift was simply that there was a last year at all. As things were going wrong in January of last year, I remember thinking very specifically that he was not likely to live. But he did. For a good part of the year, he felt much better health-wise, and that allowed him to be around when my daughter was born a month later. I called my parents, and I told them her full name, which is Lola Elise Obermayer, and that's Elise with an A. And I said to my father, "Do you know where she got her middle name?" "You." He said, "Me, really?" It would have never occurred to him that someone would want to name their child after him. The second gift was he got the chance to hold his granddaughter and bless her. He got pretty much a full summer on Martha's Vineyard. Mostly he was feeling okay. He got to be with all of his kids and grandkids. Let me tell you about the next gift, and it was a big one. Over the year, little by little, his personality began to change. I loved my father, but for most of his life, we never talked much about our emotions. I didn't think he got me on an emotional level sometimes, and we didn't connect that way. It's not that he didn't have emotions or he didn't want to connect with his children. He literally couldn't do it some of the time. The emotions and the language about them were not accessible to him. But that began to change. I realize now that it was a process that was already underway over the summer. On Martha's Vineyard, I remember him very distinctively rolling around on the living room floor with my two daughters, one of whom was almost 3 years old and the other was 5 months old. So there they are, these little girls, and they're giggling, and one of them is grabbing his nose and pulling his beard, and the other one is just drooling and slobbering all over him. And they're just rolling and they're laughing. This was not my father the way I knew him before. Thank you, Lola. In the fall, the change became more pronounced. several of us began to talk about doing something positive so that he had something to look forward to. And it centered around the awards ceremony he had started in Berlin. We arranged to contact many past awardees. We asked what impact the award had on them, and we slipped in a little part that said, he's not in good health, and if you have a personal message, please send it on. All these letters started coming back, and my brother had decided he was going to go to Berlin for the awards. We did all of this behind my father's back. I really wasn't sure what his reaction was going to be when we told him. First, I wanted to talk to him in person. The right moment never came. So in the middle of a phone conversation about something else, I said, here's what we're doing in Berlin. Hank's going to the ceremony, and we're proud of you. And there was silence. At first, I thought he was mad for going behind his back. But then I realized he was crying. We had to stop the call. I called him back 20 minutes later, and he was still crying. And that's when I really knew things were different. My father was always someone who had projects and needed to feel productive. In November, he broke his right arm. He couldn't use a computer. He couldn't even put on his own socks. He told several people, if I can't be productive, I don't want to be here. So on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, he asked to see each of his children alone. And I was pretty sure that that was supposed to be my last conversation with him. I knew he was planning on being done, and I thought about arguments I could make for him to stick around. So I said to him first, it's been really amazing to talk the way we've done, and I'm not done yet. We just couldn't do that before, and I think my siblings feel the same way. That's something different. It's a different kind of productivity. It's a different way to value yourself. But please consider that as you decide whether to stick around. And the second argument I made, which I felt silly about making, was I have 6 interviews for a job on Monday and Tuesday. And if you decide to die on Sunday, I can't do them. I felt silly, but those of you who know my father will understand. My father thought that was a really good reason. Then he said that other family members had talked to him, and he had already decided it was worth it to stick around a little while longer. That started a period of about 6 weeks. My father later told more than one person that it was the most important time in his life. We talked about more stuff we had never talked about before. There were things I had not told him. I had concealed some things from him just because I didn't think he would get them. And we talked about them. He told me about a whole year when he didn't think he would finish his PhD, and he had nightmares about it. He talked about when he first started dating my mother. On their second date, my father invited her to his apartment to talk about his books on innovation. Really. To me, that sounds like a terrible idea for a second date. Clearly, though, it worked. He talked all about their dating life before they got married. The next day, he calls me in the morning, and I can't respond. So he emails and calls again. Finally, I'm able to call him back, and he says, I've been uncomfortable and having trouble sleeping, but last night, after our conversation, I slept really well, and I had the most wonderful dreams. They were all about when I was dating your mother. That's what he wanted to talk about so badly, and that's not what we would have talked about before. Since then, I've talked to a bunch of people, one of whom does biographies for a living. There are lots of people who have difficulty relating emotionally to their parents. Usually the way the story ends is, that's how it was. We didn't relate, and that never changed. But that's not how my story ends. In the end, my father became someone who could really be my friend. And that was amazing. And that's my model for how I want to be with my daughters. There's no doubt in my mind that's a gift. Thank you. And now I'm inviting my brother and sister up. There's a song, I do somewhere. There we go. There's a song my brother sings to family members on their birthday. And we would like to sing it for my father now. Oh, I should say.
words.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, the words are in the program in the back.
Yeah, so if you can open up your program toward the back, it's probably nicer. Give me a second.
God danced the day you were born. The angels did the bump to Gabriel's horn. God danced the day you were born. So grateful for the gift of you. I saw God do the funky chicken, stomping and kicking in blue suede shoes. I saw God do the boogaloo too, faced with the gift of you. I have heard some folks say that long ago God could not dance to save his soul, but honey, I've seen him shake that jelly roll, thinking about the gift of you.
You know, I think I can picture your dad smiling. And while I didn't know him the way you did, Judy, not even close, I think he always acted on his convictions. At least that's my experience. Those of us who know Arthur know that he was a force of nature. If you said something, did something, took a position with which he did not agree, he was going to make sure that you understood completely the differences between you. But with the passion that Arthur held for whatever side of any issue, it came with an incredible sense of respect. And as we, especially in my earlier years here, 17 years ago, would have disagreements and we would have lunch and we would talk at great length, and I often walked away saying, Arthur, you know, we agree a whole lot more than you realize. I've actually been thinking about Arthur in the 6 or so weeks since his death. I can't help but imagine what he would be saying and thinking were he watching the political reality unfolding across our nation. I can hear his voice. I suspect I'm not alone. And maybe it's no small irony that we're gathering on the eve of the Massachusetts state primary. So listen for Arthur's voice. He did say his goodbyes at Thanksgiving, and each of you in your own way convinced him there was more. There were reasons to stay. And those weeks and the conversations that filled those weeks were truly blessings. When we conclude in just a few moments here in the sanctuary, there's going to be a reception across the hall in the social hall. You will see a number of displays of articles. You will see some computer terminals where you can share memories. The videographers will be out there because in a very real sense, if I go back to the Winston Churchill words, the family very much wants your story and your memory to be part of the tapestry that gets woven, most especially for the grandchildren. So please take the time to share your memory, your story, as we exit the sanctuary. And there's a special, I don't know exactly where it is, but outside there is a display about the interview that was done just shortly before Arthur's death with WBUR. It was part of their Kind World series, in which they focus on individuals who've made a difference and made the choice to make a difference. And as part of that interview, Arthur said, "A few weeks ago I was prepared for my end, but now I don't feel that way. I may die tomorrow, but at least I'm working to be doing something that is meaningful." To know Arthur is to know that everything he did was meaningful. Every commitment that he made, every cause that he undertook to support and fight for, every person who he befriended, mentored, supported, everything was about making this world and the lives of the people in it as much an improvement as he could. Arthur was always learning, he was always teaching, and he's still teaching us. He will continue to inspire us through that blessing, that gift of memory. From whence it comes, he and I will continue to disagree. Judy, over half a century, you've been blessed with an incredible partner in life, and the work that the two of you have done in creating an amazing family and in leaving and continuing to leave indelible imprints upon so many parts of our community, in so many ways, so many corners, so many layers, and not just here in Boston. You had an incredible treasure, and we are all grateful that you shared that treasure with the rest of us. Hank, Joel, and Lonnie, Marjorie and Jeff, your father loved you very deeply. The final conversation that we had was just a day or so before his death, and he said that to me quite explicitly. He's so proud of each of you, the things that you're doing, the paths that you've chosen, the grandchildren that you made the jewels in his crown and the sparkle in his eyes. And Marissa and Lola and Noah and Zachary and Amanda, while time will cause the memories that you have to dim because you're all so young, we are all going to contribute to forming a testimony of memory so that you will know the person that your grandfather has been and what he has meant to so many people in this world. Joe and Paul and Betty, I don't even know where Betty's sitting, but I saw her earlier. And all of you have been just an incredible source of love and support and comfort. 6 weeks, and yet it's as if he's still oh so ever present. May it always be so. May his soul continue to be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May his repose be now and always one of peace. And may his memory and his lessons inspire us to continue to live. Friends, again, thank you for coming. Please join the family across the hall and take inspiration from what we're about to hear as we walk across.